Alright everyone, it's time to talk about socialism, capitalism, and so forth. For anyone who's not aware, I've already described how we are not under capitalism at the moment. But I've seen something strange. You choose one of the following. Socialism holds American society together. Because when you talk to a socialist and you're like, well, I oppose socialism, they're like, oh, what about the fire departments? What about the police departments? What about the public parks? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you're saying that there are many socialistic aspects within our society. But at the same time, you're saying, oh, we're also in late capitalism and capitalism is destroying us. The two can't really coexist. You've either got a system that is heavily socialized, look at your tax rate. Let's say you're in the upper middle class. Look at how much of your income you pay out, not just in taxes, but also regulatory fees, licensing fees, indirect taxation, like a sales tax or, some sort of state tax that they levy on, property tax and so forth. Look at how much you pay, as opposed, and there's more indirect costs too. For instance, you buy a product that you're paying for in a more supposedly capitalistic manner. The price of that product is substantially higher because the business is also paying something in terms of regulatory fees, licensing fees, state tax, property tax, federal tax, everything, value-added tax, death tax, inheritance tax. They all apply. Is that really a capitalistic system, or is a significant proportion of all productivity allocated towards socialistic endeavors? It's a substantial proportion allocated to socialism. Now, there are some socialized programs that traditionally have in various forms, sometimes not the same we use now, that have worked. I say interventionism is worse than socialism. If the government simply didn't intervene, if it was simply siphoning part of the private economy to provide for socialist-style programs, but within a free market situation, like you had competition among private entities to provide those services, and they were simply granted out and guaranteed as important. Like, oh, hey, we've got 5 companies here that can mow the lawns and shear the trees and plant the flowers on this ultimately socialist public park. We're gonna see what the quotes are on behalf of the people at the government level, and we're going to, choose the lowest or choose the most qualified or something. This happens too, and when that happens, you've got a socialized system, but it ultimately, a lot of that money is going back into the private economy because you're paying that private company. And so really it's just a redirection of funds more than it is a parasitizing of funds. Then you've got situations, though, where the government is directly providing that service. There is no private competition. We would think of things, not even fire departments. In a lot of places, there are volunteer fire departments. Get donations or whatever. Small town America has a fuck ton of these. Police, though. Police are centrally planned. It's also funny that the same people, they tend to be younger. They tend to be more left-leaning. They say, well, the police are abusive, the police are tyrannical. They don't even realize that the police are a socialist fixture, the way they are administered currently in this country. A community doesn't say, well, we're going to have 4 or 5 dudes with sidearms walk around and patrol things and make sure, the local ordinances are enforced. They don't do that. It's subject to all sorts of state and federal regulations now. You see, therein lies your problem. It's a socialist fixture. It also, by the way, is unionized and costs a lot more. That's socialism. That's not a free market situation. It's not like a group of people can say, well, we want to be the police now. You should hire us instead and fire all of these other officers. We'll be the police, and here's our charter. We promise to be like, we won't abuse people. We're not even going to enforce victimless crime sort of bullshit. We'll cost less too, because we've got our own full-time day jobs, and we'll take turns patrolling or something. You can't do that. It takes a monumental amount of effort and a lack of state control over the situation largely for that to happen. Even then, they would get countermanded by the state police and federal agents and everything else under the sun, so it'd be kind of pointless. Like if they weren't enforcing every abusive law, they'd probably get thrown into a cell too by the feds. That's not capitalism. In a capitalistic system, if a group of people voluntarily wish to get together and have a couple of guards, they want to form their own fire department, whatever, they can do it. They also own the means of production. Now here's the big sticking point with declaring the U.S. a capitalist nation and then ascribing every problem that we have to capitalism. In most parts of the United States, you pay a property tax. What's a property tax? It's rent to the government. Because what happens if you don't pay it? You think that you can keep using that land or that business to continue to produce? No, you can't. What about if everything is licensed? What is a business tax ultimately? A business tax is ultimately just a license for that business to exist and continue working. What happens if you don't pay that tax? You know, and you're not a multinational corporation that can bribe a couple senators to look the other way. Well, then you get shut down. Sorry. What about FDA regulations? What about EPA regulations? What about regulations from a dozen other state and federal entities? Oh, you got to follow them. You got to have all your paperwork. There are going to be random inspections. That's not capitalism. No, it's simply no. I have no problem with a limited number of socialized programs, so long as they're not abusive in form. The problem is we've got too many of them. In most cases, they're inefficient because of no-bid contracts or state centralization. Interventionism is worse. Bureaucratic regulation and strangulation is worse than the socialism itself. If you're allocating, let's say, some reasonable total, 10% of the total private economy through some limited taxes on those capable of paying them in a gradient system, in order to provide for people who are poor, to provide beautification and aesthetics like parks, to provide basic public safety, and of course, military, which is one of the best examples of something the federal government is responsible for fielding. If you're doing that, your economy can still be totally productive. It can still have pretty much a totally unfettered free market. You can easily do that. The problem creeps in when the government begins intervening in more and more minuscule aspects of people's lives, and it goes hand in hand with excessive socialization. I say we have excessive degrees of socialization. By the way, free market versus socialism do exist upon a sort of grayscale gradient as well. A system that is almost entirely privatized is essential. It's de facto capitalism. An economy in which most things are centralized, licensed, regulated, and not part of that true free market is a socialist system. We are a socialist country. We're more socialist at this point than China. That's why we have economic problems. Countries right now that are growing, what have they done? They've privatized a bunch of stuff. They've gotten rid of regulations. It's not just a lack of socialism in the sense of taxing people and then spending on subsidies, welfare, military, whatever it happens to be. It's not just socialism in a vacuum in the economic sense. It's regulatory structure. It's excessive bureaucracy. We look at China, greatest example in the world. We look at their state-funded or state-co-opted contracts for things that they're building. More than half of them fail. We look at those that are the result of private investors who largely, they don't experience, there's no worker protection in China. There's no environmental protection in China. We can make, of course, a reasonable argument that there should be such things. Maybe on a more limited scale than we have it. Sometimes, again, that gets abusive. The regulatory burden is so much less that their private investors are better at making investments than ours, especially since they know what central planning entails. They know that it's not going to turn a profit. Most of those government programs will fail. They will run into the red. That's why they have ghost cities and rail cars that are empty but still keep churning at massive inefficiency. Fields that aren't planted, mines that aren't exploited. That's why they've got so many problems. But anything that's privately developed, oh, in China, oh, you can make a fortune on it. It's wonderful. Why do you think Trump has, he's like, oh, well, I've got the world's biggest bank renting from me in China. Why do you think he bothered to build there? It was a good investment. Now a lot of Chinese investors, they're actually investing here. I think they've got more confidence now that Trump has been elected. By the way, as an aside here, don't worry when foreign entities begin buying up land and businesses and stuff in the U.S. That's actually a very good thing. It's a sign that our economy is something that they see as stable and prosperous and a place to make a profit. Japan did this in the 1980s. Look at Japan now. Does it control the United States or its policy? No. No, it's still, economically speaking, it's sliding backwards. Massive problems with their economy. Massive demographic issues as well. China will end up the same way. When Chinese investors pour in, say, oh, I want this 10-acre tract here, and I'm going to build a farm there, and I'm going to buy this mine over here, that's a good thing for the U.S. It's not a bad thing. It's actually really good for us. They're taking foreign money and investing it in building things here. It doesn't mean that they get some magical leverage over the federal government. Maybe over states and municipalities to some limited degree. We're actually fairly effective at preventing that from happening. I'm more worried about people bribing or blackmailing within the country. Like some rich U.S. citizen who owns a multinational corporation, which is way worse than someone coming in and investing directly. Because it's a multinational firm, it has no national loyalty anywhere in the world. It's basically a stateless entity. I'm more worried about them bribing a senator. But to blame our problems on the free market, oh, we've got too much free market, we've got too much capitalism. Cronyism's not capitalism anyway. If the government can say, well, fuck the private market, we're going to give this lucrative contract, just throw taxpayer money at one business over all the others, indirectly harming them in the process because it it gives a competitive advantage unduly to one business over the others. That is not capitalism. That's interventionism. It's a facet of socialism, of leftist economics. It's been done for a long time. We have this weird mixed model hybrid system very close to maybe what China had before the last round of privatization. The federal government, in case you didn't notice, also owns an inordinate proportion of all the land area in the United States, which can't be privately developed. Some of that's, national parks, military base, okay. It doesn't need all that land. It's like with the Bundy standoff there. They said, oh, they're like endangered species on this land. You can't graze here anymore. You've been doing it for 100 years, but you can't do it anymore. And then, of course, they have their standoff. Most of them, by the way, they did nothing specifically illegal, so they're actually let go of in the investigation. I think a couple of them ended up getting arrested. Most of them, they're still walking free because they did nothing wrong. They just showed up and, played cowboy. Well, that's not illegal. I think trespassing charges were the most common. What does the federal government then do? Well, this is protected land. You can't develop it. There's like a rare tortoise or something on it. What do? They give it to a Chinese firm to develop into a solar field. Oh, there go the tortoises. There go the frogs or crickets or whatever you were trying to protect. That's not a free market situation. I'm sorry, it's just not. It's a microcosm of the whole argument, actually, with the Bundy Ranch. The thing is, they had to make it a partisan issue and say, oh, these evil, right-wingers with all their guns. Yeah, the evil racist right-wingers and some of these people showing up to defend that land were black. Yeah, they're total Nazis, totally horrible people. It's not the way that it works. We are under a more or less socialist system, some aspects of which work, most of which do not because they're inefficient and they're paired with interventionism. The socialism itself isn't what gets you. If it's limited enough, it doesn't really have a negative impact on your economy. In fact, it can be a net positive, so long as it is limited, number one, so you don't have people simply clamoring for more and more and more over time. Number two, it is part of that same free market. They can coexist in that specific manner. In general, you're either under socialism or capitalism. But a few socialized programs can exist within a capitalistic system so long as they are partaking in that free market. The government is not empowered to give no-bid contracts. The government is not empowered to regulate things out of existence. The government is not empowered to burden the population with excessive taxation. It's not a matter of, oh, all taxation is theft, ANCAP mode. It's a matter of if taxation is excessive so that anyone specifically within the population is suffering despite the fact that they're able-bodied and willing to work, that's when it's abusive. We have such a system. We have millions of people like that. Oh, I would love to start my own business, but, screw these regulations. I don't have $1 million to cough up. And then you run into an additional funny layer of problem here. You have a strange situation where a person can't simply set up shop because they get together with some friends and say, oh, well, we're going to raise money and build a little business. No, you got to take a loan out from a supposedly private entity called a bank at great interest, interest far beyond, by the way, what you get if you put money into the bank. You put money into a bank right now, what's the interest rate at that you're getting back? Now compare it to the interest that accrues on your student loans. Do you notice a little discrepancy there? Do you notice that these numbers are a little bit different? Yeah, I think that they are. Why do you think that that is? It's not capitalism. It's not capitalism at all. Stop blaming capitalism for our problems. It's a lack of capitalism and the presence of interventionism specifically that's the bane of our existence. So many other countries have this issue. There are no true capitalistic nations left in the world today. They don't exist. Most often when you say this, they say, well, why don't you move to Somalia? They don't have a free market either. Everything you do is controlled there by whoever has the most guns. That's mob rule. That's at the other end of the spectrum almost. It's more in line with anarchism of some sort. Generally left anarchism, because they still have central planning. It's just the central planning is done by whatever dude, runs the militia at the time before he gets his head blown off by some Kenyan soldier. That's how Somalia operates, which is sad. It used to be more prosperous than that. It used to have a stable economy at least. Now it's messed up. By the way, you can blame interventionist U.S. policies for that as well. What do you think a proxy war is? It's foreign interventionism. It's just the same thing as domestic interventionism. The government wants it some certain way, so it goes off and bombs someone. Here it wants something some certain way, so it throws people free money, or it regulates some business out of existence. Obama openly bragged about doing this to the coal industries. Would have been so much easier to simply say, okay, we'll match the subsidy for green energy and not let it run out. Or say, if you're going to subsidize one, they should all be subsidized if you think the energy sector is so goddamn important. But he didn't do that. He just said, oh, okay, we'll give more money to solar, but we're also going to screw these people out of existence. Ha, screw these tens of thousands of workers. They're in the bad industry that I don't like, and so blah, blah, blah. It's just sort of the way that he did business, because he's an interventionist. He is a socialist after a fashion. Not a Bernie Sanders style socialist. You got a difference. The neoliberal is just a socialist who wants to maintain current levels of socialism, but the interventionism is far worse. It's the regulatory aspect that's abusive. It's not abusive if a community says, yeah, we don't have a problem with a park and we're willing to pony up a couple dollars a person to maintain it every year because it's something we find pretty. That's not a problem. They're doing it voluntarily, but when you have 10,000 friggin' parks that they have to pay for, and everything's regulated to shit so that it costs 10 times more, that's when it becomes a problem. There's your problem. There's a problem with the U.S. economy today. Too much taxation, too much socialist programs, too much interventionism, too much bureaucracy especially. That's the worst of all. That's how it happened. It's not because of the free market. How do you think monopolies form? Monopoly forms because the government wills it to form. It's empowered to break those monopolies. Why do you think it almost never does? These businesses pay the Senate and the Congress way more than the taxpayers pay them. They've got a bunch of money, and they don't even have to pay taxes on it. Wow, look at how that works. That's about all. Peace out.